old fortress and moat. Remember the chief of staff before he said today, be careful what you ask for. Your moat is supposed to be about 6 to 8 feet deep and it's probably in the 2 to 4 foot range. John, you'll have to give me the high side if I'm up or right, but I think the last estimate was $4.5 or $5 million to dredge the moat. If we were ever to try and get the moat.
Did you say billion?
Million.
Yeah.
Yeah, four and a half to 5 million.
Million, yeah.
And that's only 2 feet of dredge. That's not to dredge it back to the original 8 feet.
Oh, I didn't know that part, so.
There is a group of divers, a training school for divers close by in Norfolk, isn't there? Where they go down and they
So what the Army did before they gave this to you, there was lots of concern. And John, this is not legend, right? They actually went through there and put their arms in the.
Yeah, in the 70s they brought Navy divers over, and the Navy divers pulled themselves along on the mud as far as their arms could reach. They pulled out. My numbers may be a little off, but 10,000 small arms rounds that trace back to a private who wasn't keeping the armory up to date, and he had an inspection, so he just chucked cases of small arm rounds out the window into the moat. They pulled out hundreds of other larger anti-aircraft round car bumpers, televisions, traffic poles. It was quite a collection that was done in the middle 70s. Then the Army came back prior to closure and did magnetometers and side scan sonar, identified all of the areas of interest, and came back and subsequently pulled out 3 bicycles, another car bumper from a 68 VW, if I remember correctly, and televisions and other cultural debris, I think is the correct terminology to make trash sound exciting. And so the Army has said that the first 2 feet of fill in the moat is clear. And they have made no assertion below 2 feet. And so that's why when we did the original estimate trying to get the Army to pay for dredging the top 2 feet, we came up with the estimate of $3 to $5 million, depending on whether we put many excavators and do that or wet suction. But the Army said they would only sign off on if we dredged the top 2 feet. Now keep in mind it was 8 feet according to the plans when it was constructed. And in some areas in the winter, if it's a low astronomical tide, you can actually see the silt.
No, it gets dry.
So, well, it actually.
I've seen mud sticking out.
You can see the silt.
I've seen dry.
There's little islands in the
I've seen dry
mud.
land in the mud.
So,
Why don't we just put
so
the
that
water
implies
in?
that in some spots it's only 2 feet
Put
deep.
the hose in.
We believe the stone lining of the moat is intact.
The drawings showed about 8 feet from the scarp and 8 feet from the counter scarp as being masonry via granite. Now, we don't know exactly about the middle portion, but 8 feet from each wall was described as being paved with granite.
We don't have any
Oh,
as-built.
my gosh.
So,
Paved with granite.
And the sonar wouldn't have revealed that?
well, it only has a certain penetration.
Okay.
It only goes 3 to 4 feet.
And one of the reasons it's important is that we're doing this, is that this is a stormwater management facility, and to the extent if the silt has reduced the capacity of the moat, it reduces our ability to manage stormwater.
It's a mini kind of wouldn't go down. What do you know?
Hey, did you find that there was no bones with the bicycle? We didn't find them missing captain coming back drunk from officer's club?
No, they recovered it. He didn't go missing.
Okay.
That's good.
It looks like, I think they're good.
It might still be down there.
That's a true story, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Thomas?
Are we pretty sure all of the ordinance is gone?
No, in fact, the Army, the moat was actually in that deed, where it is. The moat was just transferred to us because of the amount of effort that went into determining whether DEQ, as the EPA designate for Virginia, had enough authority to force the Army to deal with the contamination in the moat. The good news is the environmental contamination that's covered by CERCLA is below any human health risk. CERCLA doesn't cover military munitions, and so there is not a CERCLA Superfund provision for military munitions. The Army's assertion is the only interaction you should have with the moat is if someone has to go in temporarily to do bridge repairs or water and sewer lines that are hung on bridges. And in that case, even if they stepped off the boat and their foot sunk 2 feet in the mud, there would be no risk because the top 2 feet are clear. They've made no assertion below the top 2 feet, and DEQ had no authority to force the Army to act on the munitions in the moat.
So once we have large numbers of visitors come to the museum, and we have precocious children diving in the moat, there could be a problem with that.
Well, I know more about this, Dr. Ellis, than I ever wanted to know, but since I inherited the environmental remediation job, the Army's answer to that is the best possible thing to do is leave the munitions in the moat because it's wet, and wet munitions tend not to be dangerous, but when you pull them out, they become more dangerous. So there is, in the finding of suitability transfer document from the Army, the risk assessment was 1 munition per acre of risk, and that sounds relatively low. There are 19 acres in the moat. So if you did the math, that means there are theoretically 19 munitions and explosives of concern, MEC, that mathematically are still in the moat. And so our land use control is people will not be able to access the moat. You can't fish in the moat, you can't swim in the moat, you can't interact with the moat in order to manage the risk to health and human safety. So there will be no kayak races in the moat.
One of my ideas.
Yeah. That wasn't one of your best ideas.
No, not that
Keep thinking of those ideas. This is the 21st century. At some point, that it needs to be dredged, I would think. You probably put a floating platform. You put a dredging machine there. You dredge it up. You'd have to have 2 platforms. You put it on, and then I don't know how you unload it, but there must be a way at some point. But I grant you, it's expensive, so it's really not a priority at this point.
There are lots of scenarios. The cheapest alternative prior to when we donated Walker Army Airfield to the Park Service was to dredge it, haul the spoils up to Walker Army Airfield, lay them out until they dried, and then haul them off because they would lose 90% of their weight, and the cost would be significantly reduced if we hauled off dry material versus wet material.
You've given this a lot of thought. We appreciate it.
So Terry, just don't look at the airfield for a while. Right now, the only alternative is the safest alternative is to wet suction, and you would literally haul off damp soils, and they would be strained so that any munitions would be captured in the tube before they were evacuated.
But we're talking $5 million or something to do that.
Yes, that's the gift that the Army gave to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Was a bill for $5 million to dredge the moat, to dredge 2 feet of moat.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the foundation is going to be raising money for that. Glenn?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, so that's just one aspect of it. The other is that these sally ports. This is not one of our greater pictures, but this sally port is the main entrance, and there is already some money in the budget, John, for doing some repairs and maintenance on these.
Yes, in the CIP plan that was approved by the board, there is about $1 million $1.3 million that will probably start out with a historic structures report, and then subsequently deal with repointing.
I think I've covered
And I'm in David's, I'm handling in David's pond, so forgive me if I mistake, but essentially dealing with, you know, a jacked former hinge pins, and repointing mortar, and then there's a certain movement amongst members of the FMA staff to move the traffic signals away from the view shed of the front entrance, of the main entrance, so that you, when you take the picture of the Kodak moment, as Glenn says, you won't have modern traffic signals standing in front of the main gate.
I would also say that as part of the historic structures report, David wants to evaluate the pavement here. You can see we actually stopped the resurfacing out here, and we have not done any more overlay inside the Sally Port. The reason is because David wants to investigate to see whether or not the actual pavement, the original pavement, is still there. And if the original pavement is still there, you know, I go back to, there have been a couple of people that I have toured Fort Monroe with that were fascinated were so fascinated with this, they had to get out of the car and go touch the wall. And one of them was Pharrell Williams. And when he walked through, he made me stop the bus, and he got out, and he and his wife held hands right here and had their picture taken. And then they walked through this entrance. And when they did, nobody said a word. And I remember he drug his fingers along the wall as he went through. And I realized for the first time that he was passing through the same veil that the three men passed through over 100 years ago when they were, or 200 years ago, when they were not returned as property. And what after 242 years of bondage, the first three men who walked through that were no longer considered property were walking through that. If we could find that pavement in addition to that wall, I think we can make that a very, very special space. So I wanted to show you this to tell you that you know, there's some things that we're doing. You know, with our limited budget and with our ability to convince you to let us use your valuable CIP dollars, you know, things like the historic structures reports, we can find out what needs to be done to continue to preserve this. Can we move these stoplights all the way out to the other side of the bridge and get those out of the view shed? Can we find that pavement material? Those are the things that we can do. Repointing all of the brick walls, granite walls around the fortress, redoing the moat is, you know, you're talking over a $10 million project before it's all done. But those are the things which will be on our radar screen as we talk about the next 10, 20, and 50 years.
Inshallah. Okay.
What year is the 200th anniversary year? Which year? 2035 or something?
Well, 1819 is when they start constructing the fort. So
1819?
we're actually at the
So this is,
But the fort was garrisoned by the United States Army in 1823. So 2023 is probably the date that we would look at for something commemorative.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Shall we go on to the
Yep.
theater?
Moving on to the next one. This is a couple pictures of the